Hello and welcome to our weekly Parsha Shir with the commentary of the Alshich Vayakel. This week's Parsha, Vayakel, coming right to the end of the book of Shemais, approaching fast. And so let's start with our dedications as we normally do. It's for this week, all for Refuah Shalemas. Chaim Mordechai Dov ben Esther should have a Refuah Shalema. Ben Yomen Zev ben Yata Henienta should have a Refuah Shalema. Rafael Chai ben Sora. HaShem is doing well, should continue having a refuah shalema. Oria Chaim ben Chani Yehud is the little boy waiting for the lung transplant. He should speedily have his transplant and it should be a success. And we have to add a new little baby, I'm afraid, to our list this week. The grandson of a very close friend of mine, somebody I admire enormously. The little boy has a brain tumor. I should say, when you hear these sorts of things, your heart falls and your hope falls as well. But I have relations who live in England, and they had a grandchild as well, a little girl in this case, who had the exact same sort of brain tumor, 10 years ago. Refuah Shalema is possible as soon as HaShem feels it's right to send it along, but we are able to give a little push through our tefillas. He's called Aaron Yedidia ben Tzipora Chava. So we're going to be adding him to our list until we hear that he is completely out of trouble as well. And I'm sure your hearts, like mine, go out to all of them. They should have a Refuah Shalema. If you would like to have the share dedicated for somebody's Refuah Shalema to celebrate Simcha, any other good Jewish reason, then please just send an email to me at yy@askrabbiyyy.com, all one word, yy@askrabbiyyy.com. Let's get into our shir. This week's parsha, as I said, is Vayakel. Now, Vayakel, as we'll see in the body of the shir, is going to link us back to what we were talking about last week, because really the making of the golden calf and the donations that are requested of the Jewish people in the Parsha of Vayakel in order to build the Mishkan, these are totally connected. The Mishkan is the commandment which Hashem gives to, as it were, atone, to make right the mistake that the big mistake the Jewish people made in making the golden calf. And when I say it's a big mistake, in actual fact, that's going to be a major theme for our share today. It doesn't have to be a big mistake. In fact, I'm going to shock you by telling you, we're looking at somebody called Ribson Kazissel in his Sefer Orashaz. He says, in actual fact, here's a surprise, it was not such a big deal. I mean, I can hear smoke coming out of people's ears. It was not such a big deal. I mean, I'm translating rather loosely, you understand. But we'll see, it wasn't such a big thing, which sounds weird. So that means it's a little thing. Yeah, we're going to be focusing on little things a lot, what little things are. Let me give you one of them to begin with. You'll find this I first saw this, I think, in the B'nai, or heard this in the name of the B'nai Yisroel. It got me very excited. And if you've seen my sharing before, you'll know that I always make the joke that this is the first time that Scotland appears in the Chumash in the Torah. He's going on about Scotland again. Yes, no, but when is the first time that Scotland appears in the Torah? It's when Adam, Arisha, and Chava have made the big mistake that they made. They are thrown out of the Garden of Eden. Everything changes. The world becomes physical. Adam and Chava, who were not physical, corporeal, become physical, and with everything that goes with that, Adam has to cultivate land, go out and work by the sweat of his brow. She's going to have pain during childbirth, and of course all the rest of the stuff. And the pasuk says in Bereshis, "Koitz v'dardar tatzmiachloch," and when you go out into the field, koitz, thorns, v'dardar, and dardar. There's a good word, dardar, dalad resh. And dar is the Hebrew word for thistle. As I'm sure as everybody watching this will know, the thistle is the national flower of Scotland and in the coat of arms of Scotland as well. So here's the first place that Scotland is mentioned in the Chumash. But to be serious for a moment, the letters dar, it's very interesting because it says kites, thorns, or literally a thorn, kites, the dar, and thistles will spring up against you. What was the message that Hashem was really giving to Adam Rishon? The answer is that the message that he was giving was the fact that life is going to become far more complicated now than it was before. Why? So think of this word dardar. It's dalad resh, dalad resh. So the Bnei Yisrael says that a dalad and a resh, there are no two letters in the whole of the aleph base that are so almost identical, especially the way they're written in the Sefer Torah, than a dalad and a resh. If you imagine a resh, it's hard to draw this because it's going to be backward. There you go. I think I got it right. A resh. To make it into a dalad, at the end, the bend in the resh, there's a little flick of the pen. The cipher gives a little flick of the pen. That's called, by the way, a kites. A little thorn comes out, turning the resh into a dalad. There are two psukim in the Torah which have a big dalad. One's got a big dalad and one's got a big resh. The one we all know, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. The Echad has got a big, big dalad. And the one which is in last week's Parsha in Kisiso, and it says, you will not bow down le'el acher, to other gods, or other powers, perhaps you might translate it. And the acher is got a big resh, because echod, aleph, ches, dalad, is almost identical to aleph, ches, resh. The only difference is the dalad and the resh. The only difference between a dalad and a resh is that little kites at the end. These two are almost identical, these two letters. The only difference is the kites. And the difference between realizing echod and acher is only that tiny difference. Interestingly, the gematria, the numerical value of a resh, is 200. The numerical value of a dalad is 4. If you take 4 from 200, you're left with 196. Can you guess what the numerical value of the word kites is? The only difference separating it is a kites, which is 196 as well. It's intrinsic that these two, the symbolism of the dalad and the resh, is going to be there all the way through. And the message, before you ate from the tree of knowledge, everything was black and white. Now, what's right and what's wrong is a very nuanced difference. Very small difference indeed. As small as that little flick of the pen, but it can turn a dalad into a resh, and it can be el acher with just that flick of the pen, that little thing. It's a tiny thing that turns the dalad into something far more complicated and wrong, which is the acher. Interesting idea. And Moshe Rabbeinu, of course, when the Jewish people do what they do in making the golden calf, Hashem says, Lech, raid. And there's our dalad and resh again. Get down. I had this from my Choshev Chavrusa, from Naftali Rakov, Shlita, who saw in Medrash Yonason, Sefer of Rabbi Yonason Eibeshitz, when he says that the raid, they were on a very high level to be led by you, Moshe Rabbeinu, but now that they have mixed up the dalad and the resh, the Hashem Echad, which they should have got right, to El Acher, the golden calf, then you're going down. Lech raid, you're going down from your level because they're not at the level that requires a Moshe Rabbeinu anymore. Of course, he fights to save Klal Yisrael. But there you go. That is a very interesting example of how a tiny thing can have massive consequences. Okay, let me, before we get to the Alshich, read to move this Chumash out the way. What Rav Simcha Zissel, the founder of the Yeshiva of Kelm, says, and I think you'll find this rather astonishing. You'll find it more astonishing when you actually find the Sefer. Where have I put my Rav Simcha Zissel? Oh, here it is. Yeah. Rav Simcha Zissel says this, and this is where I said before you'll be astonished when he said it's no big deal. Gasina b'Yuma Tes Amud Beis. The Gemara in Yuma in page 9b says Mikdash Rishon, the first base of Mikdash was destroyed because, of course, of 3 things: Gili Arayas, sexual immorality; Shipkas Dami, Jews murdering other Jews; Va'avodah Zorah, and idolatry. However, the Gemara concludes there by saying that the idolatry and the murder were only vehicles to allow them to do what they really were focused on, which was the sexual immorality. So if somebody's got a more attractive wife than yours and you want to take her, then you bump off the husband in order to get her. Or if you feel a bit guilty about that, this is offending your conscience. Oh, change the parameters of your conscience, the informers of your conscience, and bring in a new religion, reform Judaism, or you can, instead of reforming Judaism and changing it, you can just bring in a completely new religion altogether, Avodah Zorah, etc. And therefore, that was that. Now, we come to the second base of Mikdash, and because of its destruction, as I'm sure we all know, it was because of Sinas Chinam. And Sinas Chinam, whereas the three I just mentioned, the Gilead Rise, the sexual immorality, the murder, and the idolatry, are mitzvahs, or prohibitions, I should say, Loisa says, which you must give up your life if you possibly can in order never to do. But this is not, it's called a Yarag Val Yavar, die rather than contravening. But the mitzvah of not hating your brother in your heart, that's something which is only a don't in the Torah. It doesn't carry the same consequences as the other three biggies. Clearly, why not? And as Rabbi Simcha says, and why on earth and how on earth could the generation that saw the second temple destroyed, who practiced Torah, learned Torah, did mitzvahs and did gimel chasodim, how could they possibly have got themselves to such a state that they would bring the temple to come crashing down? They did all sorts of mitzvahs. They did, and contained in the mitzvahs, as Rabban Vital says, in this famous Shari Kaddish, which I'm going to be reading for you in a second, contained in all the mitzvahs is the refinement of the midas, of the character traits of a Jewish person. The Rambam calls midas deus, the things you can learn. How you learn to improve your midas, your character traits, is through doing mitzvahs. But they did all these mitzvahs, so what went wrong? Interesting question. And this is the bit that I wanted, that I already trailed and will go into as well. If we go back to last week's parsha, the story of the Egel, ki lo hoyo mak midakodesh baruch al oven hagodel shelo Egel. It seems to be that God Hashem wasn't so upset about the sin of the making of the golden calf. Im lo hoyo behem midas kashus orif. If it wasn't the fact that they had the character trait, the midah, of being stubborn, kshay orav. So let's just read that. What does it mean? Kshay orav is a lamed base and tes in last week's parsha, and there it says, "V'yam Hashem al Moshe." So Hashem is informing Moshe what went wrong. V'yam Hashem al Moshe reisi es am hazaya. I see this people behinei am kshay oravu. Now he didn't say that they're idolatrous. He didn't say there are any other accusation. Rebellious, they would both be, and others would be pertinent and accurate. He says the kshay orav, and he wants to finish them off. So Simcha Zissel, with his very astute eye, says that had it not been for that, the making of the Egel, which of course is a big thing, but that's forgivable. The whole purpose of the world, in fact, the Medrash actually said God created Teshuvah before he created the world. As it were, you have to have the safety net before you put the person on the trapeze. There had to be the possibility of Teshuvah, and that means there's an expectation that people will get it wrong. And I've told you many other times in the share what the Sefer Oretz often says that Hashem created, before he created this world, 974 failed worlds. Of course, Hashem can't make mistakes. And why, if he can't make mistakes, did he make mistakes? Because there were intentional mistakes. And he informs us of it to let us know. I made a world in which I expect you to get it wrong. Because getting it wrong can be, if you allow it to be, a learning process by which you change. We all learn from our mistakes. When your teacher says, don't do it that way, that's the wrong way. You learn to do it a different way. Well, the greatest teacher is learning from our own mistakes. Therefore, okay, it was a big mistake, but it's something that's recoverable from. You can do teshuvah from. If teshuvah came before the world, that means it's teshuvah for everything in the world, including making the Egel off. But Hashem seems to, as it were, Kaviyachol, as they say in Hebrew, despair of there being a repairing process, a remedial process, because they are am kashay orif. Am kashay orif. One. And in Chomer, in B'kshas of Mechila, Gam Kos Bal Chavos Vovos. That's what the Chavos Havovos says in Shari Tshuva. It's very, very hard to be forgiven if somebody is Kashe Orif. So, what makes it so difficult now that we, after all, the Gemara that we quoted before, the Gemara in Yom Tess says, and I'll read this bit here. As we said before, there are these three things, but the Gemara goes on to say, because that they were seen and obvious what the problems were, it was easy and easier to put them right. And in fact, the Jewish people put them right when it was obvious to them where they were going wrong in 70 years, and we rebuilt the temple. But this exile, well, it's just not ended. We're talking 2,000 years. And as we can see today, it's getting profoundly worse. So, why? If they did all the mitzvahs that they did, and the answer is, if you see it on the surface, it's easy to cure. Sadly, we mentioned a little boy with cancer before. Cancer is such a clever disease, an effective disease, and it's such a fatal disease, often, Rahman al-Islam, because it hides itself away. By the time a tumor, which is the Latin word for lump, appears, and that's usually an indication that it's doing a lot more spreading than just that lump. And that's the time that it's too late, often, to effect a cure. So therefore, if it's seeable, if you can see it, I nearly said seeable. If it's obvious, if it's you can perceive it, then you can deal with it. Well, the sins of the first Beis Hamikdash were obvious, and therefore they could cure them. But these sins weren't. What sins weren't? Not the three big ones. That wasn't there. It was a small one, a little Avera. And the little Avera is don't hate your brother in your heart. It's interesting. It doesn't say don't hate your brother in the Torah. It says don't hate him in your heart. It's hidden in your heart. And then and your brother doesn't know that you hate him. In fact, you're probably quite two-faced about it. You might well hide the fact. Then he doesn't know he has to apologize and put it right. But more than that, and this is absolutely brilliant. And again, he's quoting the Chovos Levovos. The Kvar Kosav the Chovos Levovos, Shein Katnas Beriboy Kefilas Avera. In actual, even though I said before that it's a small mitzvah, in relative to the three big ones, certainly, even so, really there's no such thing. The Chovos Levovos and Hilchos Tshuva points out that even the small mitzvahs, whatever small means, or the small averas, by repetition grow, rather like a cancer. Even a very small, this is in the Perek Zayin of Hilchos Tshuva. If you do it over and over again, you're feeding it and it will grow. It says, as already said, it doesn't remain small if you keep doing it over and over and over again. And the converse is true as well. A big Avera doesn't remain a big Avera if you do tshuva, then that shrinks the tumor and gets rid of it altogether. But let's pursue this idea of the small things. So listen to this, as it's very surprising. This is Shari Kedusha of Reb Chaim Vital, of course, the Talmud of the Arizal. Of course, the Arizal was a Talmud of the... he was also a Talmud of the Alshich. And the Arizal was a Talmud of the Alshich as well. He's talking about midas. And he says, the Fichach Inyan midas haroas, bad midas, koshin min ha'avera atzmo, or worse than an avera, an individual sin, ma'oid, very, very, very much. It says this twice in Perek Rishon of Shari Kedusha. And at the end of that paragraph, he comes back to this idea, and it says, it is much, much more important that to protect yourself from having a bad midah, a bad character trait, more important than doing positive mitzvahs or negative mitzvahs. Because when a person has got good midas, then benokil, you can call them mitzvahs. Then you very soon and very easily come to do all of the mitzvahs. Because the reason you do averas and don't do mitzvahs is because you get bad midas. So you can work in that, then everything should obviously fall into place. So he says that a small avera, the small avera was hidden because there's 613 mitzvahs. And they, at the time of the second base of Mikdash, not that didn't do the big obvious ones, Shifkas Domim, Avodah Zorah, Gili Arias, that was the first base of Mikdash. That's obvious. Then you can be right. They kept all the mitzvahs, as we said before. What did they do? Torah, mitzvahs, Gimelas, Chasadim, 612 mitzvahs. And when you're doing 612 mitzvahs and you're doing them very well, at a very high level, it's very, very hard to see maybe you're limping when it comes to the 613th mitzvah. I'm sure, as he says himself, that it's obvious that the sinus and the hatred they had towards each other wasn't the sort of sinus we see today, sadly, in Israeli politics in the streets of Tel Aviv before October the 7th. No, it's far more subtle and sophisticated and imperceptible sinus, but it's there. And therefore, it's a small thing, but again, over and over again, the little thing, as we just saw, becomes really quite a big thing and grows and grows and grows. So, having said all that, I think we can say that, to keep with our rather unfortunate metaphor, when somebody is being operated on to remove a cancerous tumor, when you wake up, you want the surgeon to say 4 words: "I got it all," as much as he possibly can. Of course, cancer works at the cellular level, so he's only saying what I can see with my eye, not what I can see with a microscope. His job is to take out the diseased flesh, the more minute stuff. That's beyond the skill of his fingertips. But really, you want to go down to the source of the problem. And the source of the problem, HaShem himself says, is a bad midah. The Amkshe Orif. They're people who don't want to change. It's an interesting concept that HaShem isolating the midah, just as Rabbi Vital says, as being the source of the problem. Because, of course, if you're not going to change, then you're not going to change direction. I think I've told you before, brilliantly, Reb Simcha Wasserman, Reb Chana Wasserman's son, once said that the rabbis say that if your rabbi tells you your right hand is your left hand, your left hand is your right hand, you should believe them. Why wouldn't you do such a thing? Well, 2 reasons. One is you don't understand what it's about, or 2, because you don't want to change. Because he secures that conclusion with the following thing. He points out when the rabbis chose a mashal, chose an analogy, it wasn't random. It was perfectly tailored to the point they tried to illustrate. After all, to make the same point, surely they could have said, if your rabbi tells you black is white and white is black, believe him. Tall is small and small is tall, thin is fat and fat is thin, hot is cold and cold is hot. Why did they insist on this mashal? If your rabbi tells you your right hand is your left hand is your right hand, believe him. Well, I wear a watch in my right hand. The point is, he's saying that you have to be able to find a rabbi you're willing to listen to, that if he tells you to turn around, you're going in the wrong direction. And if you turn 180 degrees, my right hand is now over there in the other side. You have to find somebody you're willing to listen to. I suppose being willing to listen to somebody requires you to know that you've got a problem. Rabbi Dessler in Mishkan in page 62 Chelik Aleph says an incredibly important thing. Even though it might be a small thing, a small flaw, you are able to identify it. After that, it's just a question of, do you want to identify it? And the Chovos HaLevavos says a scary thing, featuring the Chovos HaLevavos a lot tonight. And that is ultimately the reason that the Jewish people made the golden calf. That nobody said, hey, let's wait a day. Maybe he meant he's going to be back a day later. Maybe we've miscalculated. Because deep down, they didn't want to. They didn't want it. They were scared. And why? Because they were scared they weren't able to keep it. Now, we've got a rule in the Malcolm Bob and Shani and Brioseph, as the Gemara says, God doesn't mess you about. If he offers you the Torah, it must be doable. But that's what they were scared of. They didn't quite get that. And so deep down, the source was a bad midah. And that came out as the Am Ksheorap expression of Hashem Baruch. Because somebody who's not willing to turn around and go in the opposite direction is somebody who will never cure themselves. Unless, of course, you get somebody to help cure you. And that's when Moshe stood in the breach and protected the Jewish people. And that takes us to now Vayakel. When we look at Vayakel, you'll see very, very interestingly, let me just turn here. And Vayakel says the following thing. Vayakel Moshe is called Adas B'nai Yisrael. Moshe gathers the entire congregation of the Jewish people. Now it's interesting, all the congregation of the Jewish people wanted to say all the Jewish people. It's the entire congregation. These are the words that you have to do. So the Alshich Kodesh, these are the things you have to do. The Alshich Kodesh, he says something which, of course, is typical Alshich. Would have to be saying he's the Alshich. And he says the following thing. He says there are three or several factors that led the Jewish people to fall to bits when it came to the making of the golden calf. And what we're talking about here is a reversal of that process. One of the main things, it says, was Perid. There was a breakdown in the structure and the unity of the Jewish people. I saw a very, very disturbing article in today's Wall Street Journal, and it was that the Hamas in Gaza are holding out against pressure from the Americans, from the Egyptians, and of course the Israelis, for a ceasefire and a return of hostages, because Sinwar Russia is quite convinced that the split that's opening up between Israel and the United States of America, and here's the biggie, and the split that's opening up in the war cabinet between the three leaders of the war cabinet is a good sign for him. They are weak because they are split. And as I alluded to before, when the Jewish people were split, and were splitting themselves, with 1 million people demonstrating against, and forget all the legal thing, the main thing was against the other camp, particularly the Frum people, the Haredim. Then some of the captured Hamas terrorists said that encouraged us to make the attack. They are weak because they are misfareds, they're split in pieces. So he says the following thing. Why does it say gather them all together? Vayakel Moshe is called Adas B'nai Yisrael, because if you remember the making of the golden calf, then it was a das. They made again the same word. There was a congregation, a rising up of a group against the leadership of Klal Yisrael. In this case, that was Aaron. So they came to they instead of being unified, they were no longer unified. They had no longer the same purpose. And the Alshich says the following thing. One, he says, if a person is going to cure the Jewish people of a disease of that split us and got us in terrible trouble the last time, the second base of Mikdash and thrown out, the Sina Skinam. And if there was the same split type dynamic between the Jewish people that went on, that led to the making of the golden calf, you have to reverse that process. And he says, well, therefore, one is the Rafas Bedover Makabel al Masava Oven. First of all, you have to reverse what went wrong. Two, get rid of the source, expel the source of what caused the problem, any disease. What's causing it? Are you drinking from poisoned water? Is that causing cholera? Then it says the Alshich thing. You have to get anything that is similar, that could cause another outbreak or a similar outbreak, and get rid of that as well. That makes perfect medical sense today. And then that's why he says, listen to this. Vayakel Moshe. And Moshe gathered. Why? Because they gathered against Aaron, the same word Vayakel. That was a gathering for something negative. We now have to have a gathering for something positive. More than that, It was a gold calf. A gold calf. They brought one thing. Instead of bringing one thing, the Jewish people are going to be asked to bring various things for the making of the Mishkan. And as I said at the beginning, the Mishkan is going to be the remedy for the sin of the golden calf. How many different items, copper and wool and various other things, do they have to bring? Silver. They have to bring 13 different elements, 13 different things, which are going to repair the damage. Why 13? Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that there are 13 tribes. And also the word echod, one, has got a numerical value of 13. The unity of the Jewish people is expressed in our difference. We're allowed to be different. It's just that that difference should harmonize and does harmonize, if we allow it, with the other parts of the 13. And therefore we work, as it were, as a symphony with all different parts playing nicely together. Okay, so again, it's going to be an undoing or reverse of what happened. One thing causing split, 13 things causing one thing. We'll all bring that together. So then he goes through his list. So therefore, Baruch, Vayakel, so there's got to be a gathering, that's the name of the parsha, to parallel, but now and the reverse, a gathering that led to the making of the golden calf. That's going to be something that will bring us together, and that's going to be the Mishkan. So that apart from the fact that it was a terrible thing that he did, it was also done in large numbers and in public. Now we'll have large numbers in public doing something good, reversing the process. Now the Rabbeinu Yonah famously says, how do you undo a Chilul Hashem? Make a Kiddush Hashem. That's what they're doing. Secondly, the Harchik HaGorimo. And also remember, we've got to get away from the source that caused the thing in the outbreak. Who caused the golden calf? It was the Erev Rav. So what does the pasuk say? It says that it's the Vayakel Moshe is called Adas B'nai Yisrael. Only the Jewish people. For the making of the Mishkan, it's going to be the Jewish people. The Erev Rav, the mixed multitudes, those who join the Jewish people for insincere motives, they are not part of this. So you're going to distance yourself from the people that caused the problem in the first place in this ultimate act of reversal. Kalama Achloi as the Erev Rav, but not the Erev Rav who caused the problem in the first place. And the third thing, to make sure there's no negativity, as the Pasuk goes on to say, it must never mean that you are going to break Shabbos for the making of the Mishkan. Shabbos has priority because Shabbos brings us all together. We gather in shows, might be too busy during the week. We go to Shiurim together. Again, it's a bringing together idea. It's a creating achdus. I can't think of any message combining the sin of the golden calf to where we are now in the article in the Wall Street Journal. It's very pertinent. We have to watch the elements that try to destroy us, and we will have to work on unity at a time when people are busy working and disconnecting the Jewish people, undoing the joints that bind us together, just like they did before, which, and I'll be hardly the first rabbi to say, that disunity, we only need to ask Hamas, that led them, encouraged them to do what they did. Now we have to find that unity again in the face of those and in rejection of those who try to cause conflict and split in the Jewish people. I'll see you again next week. Good Shabbos.